The tall glass building of Smith Industries sparkled in the morning sun as the CEO stared out his 30th floor window. His reflection showed a man in his mid-40s wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, but his eyes held worry rather than pride. The quarterly employee satisfaction reports sat on his mahogany desk, and they weren't good, again. "There's something wrong here," he muttered, picking up the report for the third time that morning. The numbers showed one story: high turnover rates, low morale, and declining productivity. But between the lines, he sensed a deeper problem. Despite being one of the few black CEOs in the industry, he felt disconnected from what was really happening on the ground floor of his own company. His fingers drummed against the desk as he thought about his journey. 10 years ago, he'd started this company with a dream of creating an inclusive workplace where talent mattered more than anything else. Now, with over 500 employees, something had gotten lost along the way. The CEO picked up his phone and called his most trusted advisor, his wife. "I've been thinking," he said when she answered, "about doing something crazy." "Honey, your crazy ideas built this company," she replied with a laugh. "What's on your mind?" He walked over to the window again, watching the busy street below where employees scurried in and out of the building. "What if I worked as a receptionist in my own company? No one knows what I look like on the lower floors. I'm just a name and an email signature to most of them." There was a pause on the other end. "You mean, go undercover?" "Exactly. 2 weeks as a temp receptionist. No special treatment, no privileges. Just me, a desk, and a front row seat at how this company really runs." His wife's voice softened. "You know this could backfire in 100 different ways, right? What about the board meeting next week? The investor calls?" He smiled, already feeling more energized than he had in months. "I'll handle it. Most of those can be done remotely anyway." He glanced at his reflection again, imagining himself in regular business casual clothes instead of his usual suits. "I need to understand why we're losing good people, why the spirit I wanted to build here isn't reaching everyone." "Well," his wife said, and he could hear the smile in her voice, "at least you'll finally learn how to work the copy machine." After hanging up, he called his executive assistant into his office. Her eyes widened as he explained his plan, but she quickly caught his vision. Together, they crafted his temporary identity, a simple resume showing basic office experience, nothing that would draw attention. "We'll need to keep this between us and the board," he said, reviewing the fake background they'd created. "And I'll need you to run interference if anything urgent comes up." His assistant nodded, then hesitated. "Sir, are you sure about this? The executives rely on you for everything." He stood up and walked to a wall of photos showing the company's growth over the years. "Maybe that's part of the problem. We've gotten too comfortable up here. How can I make decisions that affect hundreds of lives when I don't really know what their daily lives look like?" That evening, after most employees had left, he walked down to the reception area. The difference between the executive floor and the lobby was striking. From the furniture to the air conditioning, everything felt different. He sat in the receptionist's chair, testing how it felt. An older cleaning lady walked by, giving him a curious look. He smiled and nodded, and she returned the gesture before continuing her work. This small interaction, so different from the usual deferential treatment he received, felt refreshingly real. Looking around at the worn desk, the outdated computer, and the scratched visitor badges, he realized this wasn't just about employee satisfaction anymore. This was about rediscovering the soul of his company, about understanding the real human stories that numbers and reports could never capture. As he rode the elevator back to his office, his determination grew stronger. In 1 week, he would step into a different world, his own company, but seen through entirely new eyes. What he didn't know was that this decision would change not just his perspective, but the lives of countless employees in ways he couldn't imagine. The CEO stood in front of his bathroom mirror early Monday morning, adjusting the collar of his simple blue button-down shirt. Gone were his designer suits and expensive wash, replaced by off-the-rack business casual clothes and a basic timepiece from the department store. His wife leaned against the doorframe, trying not to laugh. "I haven't seen you in khakis since our first date," she said, straightening his collar. "But something's still not quite right." She reached up and messed with his usually perfectly groomed hair, making it slightly less neat. "There. Now you look like someone who makes normal money." He chuckled, but his stomach was doing flips. Is it crazy that I'm more nervous about this than I was about speaking at last year's industry conference? Not crazy at all, she replied, handing him the worn laptop bag they'd bought at a thrift store. You're stepping into a whole different world. Just remember, no fancy words, no business strategy talk, and please try not to accidentally solve anyone's problems like a CEO would. The drive to work felt strange. Instead of pulling into his reserved parking spot, he parked in the crowded public garage 2 blocks away. Walking to the building with the morning crowd, he blended in with hundreds of other employees hurrying to start their day. His executive assistant met him at the side entrance, looking anxious. The temporary ID card is ready, she whispered, handing him a badge with his photo and the name Robert Wells printed on it. HR thinks you're starting today as a 2-week temp. I've told the security team you'll be handling reception from 8 to 5. The CEO, now Robert, took a deep breath and clipped the badge to his shirt. Any last-minute advice? Try not to look so in charge, she said with a small smile. And remember, the reception computer is ancient, the phone system is complicated, and nobody likes the coffee in the break room. His first challenge came immediately. Instead of the executive elevator with its smooth ride and wood paneling, he squeezed into the cramped main elevator with 7 other employees. Everyone stared at their phones or the floor numbers, avoiding eye contact in that universal elevator way. The reception desk looked different from this side. The chair squeaked when he sat down, and the computer monitor had a scratch across one corner. A sticky note on the desk listed various phone extensions and procedures, most of them written in rushed handwriting. You the new temp? A gruff voice made him look up. The head of building security stood there, but instead of the usual respectful nod he gave the CEO, he barely glanced at Robert. Logan's on the paper there. Phones start ringing at 8. Good luck. And he walked away. The morning rushed by in a blur of confusion and minor emergencies. The ancient computer took 5 minutes to boot up. The phone system seemed designed by someone who hated humanity. Every time he tried to transfer a call, it ended up in the wrong department. A delivery person got angry when he couldn't find the right form for signing in packages. During a rare quiet moment, he overheard 2 middle managers walking past, discussing budget cuts. We'll start with the usual office supplies, break room snacks, maybe delay replacing some of these old computers, one said. The CEO felt a twinge of shock. He'd approved a technology upgrade budget months ago. Where had that money gone? By lunchtime, his respect for receptionists had grown immensely. His back hurt from the uncomfortable chair, his eyes strained from the flickering monitor, and his ears rang from the constant phone calls. When a young employee stopped by to ask where to find HR forms, he had to admit he didn't know. A strange feeling for someone who usually had all the answers. In the break room, he sat alone with his packed lunch. His wife had insisted on making it look appropriately modest. He watched as employees grouped together, talking about their weekends and sharing snacks. One group was complaining about the new parking fees, another about the broken vending machine that had been reported months ago. As he listened, he realized something profound. He was hearing the real voice of his company for the first time. Not filtered through managers or prettied up in reports, but raw and honest. The proud company he thought he'd built looked very different from down here. Returning to the reception desk, he pulled out a small notebook and began taking notes. His hand hesitated over the page as he wondered, how had he let things get this disconnected? And more importantly, what else would he discover in the days to come? A group of executives walked past, engrossed in conversation. None of them looked at him, the invisible man at the front desk. He smiled slightly, knowing that his real education was just beginning. By his 3rd day at the reception desk, Robert had started to get the hang of things. He'd learned to jiggle the phone cord just right when it lost connection, and discovered that the ancient computer needed exactly 3 minutes to warm up before it would connect to the internet. But what really opened his eyes that day were the people and their stories. The morning started with a rushed-looking woman hurrying through the lobby, clutching her bag and a stack of papers. She was heading straight for the elevator when the department head stepped out, blocking her path. Late again, the department head said loudly, checking his watch. This is the 3rd time this month. You know our policy. I'm sorry, sir, she replied quietly. The school bus was delayed, and my son. I don't need excuses. We have deadlines to meet. One more late arrival and we'll have to discuss your future with the company. The CEO watched as the woman hurried to her desk, her shoulders slumped. Later, during his coffee break, he overheard other employees talking about her. She was one of their best programmers, regularly staying late to finish projects. She'd even created a new software solution that saved the company thousands of dollars. But as a single parent with a special needs child, she sometimes struggled with the rigid 9-to-5 schedule. Around lunchtime, a delivery arrived from an expensive restaurant, for the executive floor, of course. The delivery person asked him about the last time he'd ordered from them. "Oh, I bring my lunch," he said, patting his worn lunch bag. The delivery person laughed. "Smart move. One of your coworkers told me they had to stop ordering lunch because the company raised the parking fees again. Said they're spending an extra $100 a month just to park their car now." That stopped him cold. He'd approved those parking fee increases himself based on reports showing competitive market rates. But he hadn't considered how it would affect employees living paycheck to paycheck. The afternoon brought more eye-opening moments. A young man in a crisp suit came to the front desk, asking about job openings in the IT department. His resume showed impressive qualifications, including advanced degrees and certifications. But when he mentioned a 2-year gap in his employment history, the HR representative barely glanced at his resume before saying they needed someone with more consistent experience. After the young man left, looking defeated, the HR rep turned to him. "Between you and me," she said, lowering her voice, "we've got orders from above. No employment gaps, no exceptions. Makes the company look better on paper." She shrugged and walked away, leaving the CEO stunned. He'd never approved such a policy. Later, he watched as the cleaning staff arrived for their evening shift. One of them, an older gentleman, sat down heavily in the lobby chairs to catch his breath. "You okay?" the CEO asked, concerned. "Just tired," the man replied with a warm smile. "Working 2 jobs now. My wife's medicine costs went up after the company changed insurance plans, but we'll manage, we always do." That hit hard. The insurance change had been presented to him as a cost-saving measure that wouldn't impact employee welfare significantly. Clearly, someone hadn't told him the whole truth. As the day wound down, he observed a group of younger employees huddled around a desk, quickly dispersing when a manager walked by. Later, during his last coffee break, one of them explained they were working on an innovative project idea, but had given up trying to submit it through official channels. "What's the point?" she said, stirring her coffee. "Last time someone suggested improvements, they got told to stay in their lane. So now we just keep our heads down and do what we're told." The CEO felt a deep sadness settling in his chest. This wasn't the company he dreamed of building. Somewhere between the vision and the reality, something had gone very wrong. That evening, after everyone had left, he sat at the reception desk writing in his notebook. The cleaning gentleman passed by again, this time noticing his troubled expression. "Rough day?" he asked kindly. "Just learning a lot," the CEO replied honestly. The old man nodded wisely. Sometimes the best view of a house isn't from the top floor, it's from the foundation. With that, he continued his rounds, leaving the CEO to ponder those words. Looking around the empty lobby, he realized that in just 3 days, he'd learned more about his company than in the last year of executive meetings. But the real question was, what was he going to do about it? By Thursday, word had spread about the friendly new receptionist, and more employees started stopping by the front desk to chat. During lunch break, Robert found himself invited to join a group in the break room where the real stories began to unfold. "You should have been here 2 years ago," said a woman from accounting, unwrapping her sandwich. The atmosphere was totally different. "We used to have monthly team events, recognition programs, even a suggestion box that actually worked." Another employee nodded, stirring his microwaved noodles. "Now it's all about numbers and reports. Last week, they told us our productivity wasn't meeting optimal metrics, whatever that means." The CEO listened intently, remembering the colorful presentations about improved efficiency he'd seen in board meetings. The graphs had shown impressive gains, but sitting here now, he wondered about the human cost behind those numbers. His thoughts were interrupted by a commotion near the vending machines. A young IT worker was trying to help an older employee who seemed frustrated with the new employee portal on her phone. They expect us to clock in and out on this app now, she explained to Robert later when he offered to help. But half of us can't even get it to work properly. My grandson set it up for me, but it keeps crashing. They said they'll start docking pay for incorrect clock-ins next month. The CEO felt his stomach tighten. He'd approved the digital transition, assured by his team that training would be provided. Clearly, that hadn't happened. Later that afternoon, he overheard two middle managers discussing upcoming promotions in hushed tones by the water cooler. "What about that guy from tech support?" one asked. "He's been here 3 years, consistently top performer." "You know how it is," the other replied, lowering his voice further. "Upper management wants people who fit the company image. Besides, he didn't go to the right schools." The CEO gripped his pen tightly, pretending to focus on his computer screen. As one of the few black executives in the industry, he'd fought against such bias his entire career. Now it seemed the very same discrimination was flourishing right under his nose. A bright moment came when the cleaning gentleman from the previous day, he'd learned his name was Mr. Chen, stopped by with a surprising revelation. After some friendly chat, Mr. Chen mentioned he used to be a software engineer in his home country. "I created a better system for tracking our cleaning schedules," he said proudly, showing a simple but elegant app on his phone. "It helps us coordinate better, saves time." I showed it to the facilities manager, but he shrugged, leaving the sentence unfinished. During a quiet moment, the CEO pulled up his company's hiring database. Sure enough, there was a $50,000 contract with an outside vendor for a facilities management system that was far less efficient than Mr. Chen's solution. The day's biggest eye-opener came from a conversation he overheard between two employees discussing their children's college plans. "I had to tell my daughter she can't go to her dream school," one said, wiping away tears. "Even with scholarships, we can't afford it. The tuition assistance program they promised when I started here, they quietly dropped it last year. Now it's just loans." The CEO remembered that decision. It had been presented as a necessary cost-cutting measure, with assurances that very few employees use the program anyway. Sitting here now, listening to dreams being crushed, those budget spreadsheets felt very different. As the workday wound down, he noticed a young woman from the marketing team staying late, eating dinner at her desk. She explained she was working on a presentation for tomorrow. "The Wi-Fi at my apartment isn't reliable," she said. "Can't afford better internet with these salaries, so I stay here to finish work sometimes." Walking to his car that evening, the CEO's mind was heavy with everything he'd learned. The perfectly polished reports he received upstairs painted one picture, but down here, the reality was messier, more human, and far more troubling. In his car, he pulled out his notebook, now filled with 4 days of observations. The words and stories blurred together, talented people being overlooked, broken systems left unfixed, human needs ignored in favor of metrics and margins. What kind of company have we really built? He whispered to himself, starting his car. The answer was becoming clearer, and it wasn't one he liked. Friday brought the moment that would change everything. The CEO had settled into his role as Robert the receptionist, getting better at juggling phone calls and visitor badges when he witnessed something that made his blood boil. It started during the morning rush. A young woman from the accounting department hurried to the break room, looking pale and shaky. He'd noticed her taking quick breaks before, but today she seemed particularly unwell. Just as she disappeared into the break room, one of the senior managers stormed up to the reception desk. "Where is she?" he demanded, his face red with anger. "That's the 3rd time this week she's left her desk without permission." The CEO felt his heart rate quicken. "I believe she went to the break room," he said carefully. "She didn't look well." "I don't care if she's dying," the manager snapped. "We have deadlines. These millennials think they can just wander off whenever they feel like it." Before Robert could respond, the manager stormed into the break room. Through the open door, everyone could hear his shouting. "This is completely unacceptable. If you can't handle a full workday, maybe you should find another job. We're not running a hospital here." The young woman's voice was barely audible. "Sir, I just needed my insulin, my blood sugar." "I don't want excuses. Back to your desk now. And this is your final warning." The CEO watched, horrified, as the woman hurried past his desk, wiping tears from her eyes. An older coworker followed her out, rubbing her back supportively. During lunch, he learned the full story from other employees. The woman had diabetes, and the company's recent changes to health insurance had made her medication much more expensive. She was rationing her insulin to make it last longer, which meant she needed more frequent breaks to manage her blood sugar levels. The worst part, one coworker whispered, "She's one of our best accountants. Found an error last month that saved the company thousands, but they treat her like she's disposable." That afternoon, the CEO noticed more signs of a broken system. A talented programmer got passed over for a team lead position because she couldn't stay late for team bonding. She was a single parent. A maintenance worker with an innovative cost-saving idea couldn't get anyone to listen because he wasn't in management. But the final straw came near the end of the day. The young accountant from the morning incident approached his desk, her hands trembling slightly as she placed an envelope in front of him. "Could you make sure HR gets this?" she asked quietly. "Of course," he replied, already knowing what it was. "Are you okay?" She tried to smile but couldn't quite manage it. "I can't work somewhere that makes me choose between my health and my job. My friend's company is hiring. Their insurance actually covers pre-existing conditions properly." After she left, the CEO sat at his desk, staring at the resignation letter. The company was about to lose a talented employee not because of her performance, but because the system had failed her. All those cost-cutting measures and efficiency improvements he approved, they weren't just numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. They were real people with real lives being hurt by these decisions. He pulled out his phone and sent a text to his wife. "I've seen enough." Her reply came quickly. "Time to fix things." "More than fix things," he typed back. "Time to transform everything." That evening, after most employees had left, he sat at the reception desk writing in his notebook. The cleaning gentleman, Mr. Chen, passed by again. "You look troubled," Mr. Chen observed, leaning on his mop. The CEO looked up, his decision already made. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "you have to tear things down to build them back better." Mr. Chen nodded wisely. "In my country, we have a saying, the strongest trees have the deepest roots. Maybe it's time for this company to remember its roots." As he drove home that night, the CEO's mind was already racing with plans. Monday would be his last day as Robert the receptionist. But it would also be the first day of a complete company transformation. He had one weekend to prepare for what would be the most important meeting of his career. He now knew exactly what needed to change. The question was, would the rest of the management team be ready for just how deep those changes needed to go? Monday morning felt different. The CEO arrived early, still dressed as Robert the receptionist, knowing it would be his last day undercover. But he wasn't prepared for what would unfold during the office's monthly potluck lunch. "You have to join us," insisted one of the customer service representatives, stopping by his desk. "Everyone brings something to share. It's the one day we all feel like a real team." He'd brought a simple dish, his wife's rice and beans recipe, served in a well-worn plastic container to maintain his cover. As he walked into the break room, he was struck by the transformation. The usually drab space was alive with color and conversation. Desk barriers disappeared as people from different departments mingled, sharing food and stories. A young developer was proudly explaining her mother's secret recipe for spring rolls. "She taught me before I moved here for this job," she said, offering him one. "Some days, making these is the only thing that keeps me connected to home." The CEO took a bite, and the flavors brought a genuine smile to his face. "These are amazing," he said truthfully. "You should sell these." She laughed softly. "Actually, I had this idea for a company app, like a virtual cookbook where employees could share recipes and stories. Maybe even organize cultural food events." But, she shrugged, nobody up there cares about building community anymore. Throughout the lunch, he discovered more hidden talents and dreams. The quiet guy from it turned out to be an accomplished musician who'd organized the previous year's holiday party entertainment before the event budget was cut. The maintenance worker had 3 patents to his name, but couldn't afford to develop his latest invention. A group of employees started talking about the company's early days. "My aunt worked here when they first started," one person said it felt like family back then. The founder would chat with everyone, knew all their kids' names. Had this crazy idea about building a company where everyone could grow. Wonder what happened to that dream, someone else muttered. The CEO felt his chest tighten. He remembered making those same promises when he started the company. Somewhere along the way, spreadsheets and profit margins had overshadowed the human element he'd once valued so much. After lunch, a small group lingered to clean up. He stayed to help, listening as they shared their hopes and frustrations openly, thinking he was just another temp worker. "You know what's crazy?" said one woman washing dishes. "We've got all these talented people here, but nobody asks us what we think. My last company had this system where employees could submit ideas directly to leadership. Here, good luck getting past your supervisor's supervisor." As they talked, someone brought up the young accountant who had resigned on Friday. "It's not just her," an 8 worker added. "We've lost 5 great people this year, all because they couldn't get basic support or recognition." Later that afternoon, he overheard 2 employees discussing their innovative solution for improving customer service response times. Their excitement was contagious as they showed him their prototype on a laptop. "We worked on this during lunch breaks," one explained. "Could cut response times in half. But when we tried to present it, they said we needed to follow proper channels. Been sitting in someone's inbox for 3 months now." As the day wound down, Mr. Chen stopped by again. This time, he had a young man with him, his son, a college student studying computer science. "He helped me build that scheduling app I told you about," Mr. Chen said proudly. "Maybe one day he'll work for a company that actually listens to its people." The CEO watched them leave, feeling both heavy with responsibility and energized with purpose. He'd started this undercover journey thinking he'd learn about efficiency and productivity. Instead, he'd discovered something far more valuable: the untapped potential of his people, their dreams, their innovations, and their desire to belong to something meaningful. That evening, sitting at the reception desk one last time, he finalized his notes. Tomorrow, he would return as the CEO. But he wouldn't just be announcing changes, he would be reigniting the original dream that had started this company. The question was, could he translate everything he'd learned into real, lasting change? Tuesday morning arrived with heavy rain, but the CEO had something far more stormy on his mind. As he put on his familiar tailored suit, his wife noticed his unusual silence. "Nervous?" she asked, adjusting his tie. "Everything's about to change," he replied. "Some people aren't going to like it." His first stop wasn't his top-floor office. Instead, dressed in his CEO attire, he walked straight to the reception desk where he'd spent the last week. The morning receptionist looked startled to see him there. "Sir, we weren't expecting." "It's okay," he said gently. "I just wanted to see something." He sat in the squeaky chair, looked at the scratched desk, the ancient computer. Everything felt different from this angle, even in his expensive suit. Throughout the morning, he watched from his office as a talented young black employee cleared out his desk. He'd learned during his undercover week that this was the 3rd time this employee had been passed over for promotion, despite consistently outperforming his peers. The employee's exit interview landed on his desk an hour later. The words jumped out at him: limited growth opportunities, unclear advancement criteria, feeling invisible. He thought about his own journey as a black executive, the barriers he faced, the promises he'd made to himself about creating a different kind of workplace. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost sight of those promises. Around lunchtime, he took the main elevator down to the cafeteria, something he hadn't done in years. He saw the young accountant with diabetes having lunch with her team, probably one of her last meals here before her resignation took effect. A few tables over, the programmer who'd been denied promotion was explaining something to colleagues, her enthusiasm still visible despite everything. Mr. Chen was mopping nearby, and their eyes met. For a moment, the CEO thought he saw a flicker of recognition in the older man's face, but it passed quickly. Back in his office, he reviewed the notes he'd taken during his week undercover. Each page told a story of wasted potential, of broken systems, of people trying their best against unnecessary obstacles. He thought about the monthly potluck, how alive everyone had felt when they were simply allowed to be themselves and share their gifts. His assistant interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, the board members are asking about tomorrow's emergency meeting. They want to know the agenda." "Tell them it's about our company's future," he replied, his voice firm. "And make sure every department head is there. No excuses." Late afternoon brought another reminder of why change was necessary. He overheard two middle managers discussing the problem of flexible work hours. "These people need to learn discipline," one said. "Back in my day." The CEO thought about the single mother developer, brilliant at her job but struggling with rigid schedules. About Mr. Chen's scheduling app that could have solved so many problems. About all the talent and innovation being suffocated by outdated thinking. As the workday ended, he walked through each floor of the building. He saw the empty desk where the young accountant would have sat, the worn-out chairs in the break room, the flickering fluorescent lights that never got fixed. But he also saw the potential, the energy of people who, despite everything, still cared enough to try making things better. In the parking garage, he ran into the young developer who'd shared her spring rolls at the potluck. She looked startled to see the CEO, quickly mumbling a greeting and hurrying past. He remembered how confidently she'd explained her app idea to Robert the receptionist, and how that confidence had vanished in the presence of authority. That night, he stayed late in his office, preparing for tomorrow's meeting. His wife called, wondering where he was. "I'm rewriting the future," he told her. "Everything we talked about when I first started this company, all those dreams about creating something different, something better, it's time to make them real." "They won't all support you," she warned. "I know," he replied, looking out at the city lights. "But I'm not asking for their permission. Sometimes being a leader means remembering why you wanted to lead in the first place. Tomorrow would change everything. Some careers would end, others would begin. But most importantly, a company would remember its soul." Wednesday morning arrived with unprecedented activity in the office. Word had spread about an emergency all-hands meeting. The boardroom buzzed with nervous energy as department heads and managers filed in, whispering among themselves. The CEO stood at the window, watching employees arrive for work. From up here, they looked like tiny dots moving through the lobby. But now he knew their stories, their struggles, their untapped potential. "Sir," his assistant poked her head in, "everyone's assembled. And the young accountant's resignation letter is on your desk for signing." He picked up the letter, then reached for something else, his badge from the past week. Robert Wells smiled back at him from the photo. "Time to shake things up," he said quietly. The boardroom fell silent as he entered. Every seat was taken, with additional chairs brought in for middle managers. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Before we begin," he said, standing at the head of the table, "I want to share something with you." He pulled out the receptionist badge and placed it on the table. "For the past week, I've been working as a temporary receptionist in our own building." The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Several managers turned pale. "Impossible," one department head sputtered. "We would have recognized." "Would you?" the CEO challenged. "When was the last time any of you actually looked at our front desk staff? Or spoke to our maintenance team? Or listened, really listened, to our employees?" He pulled out his notebook and began reading. Day 1. Watched a talented programmer get reprimanded for being 3 minutes late because her special needs child had a morning crisis. Day 2. Discovered our maintenance staff includes a former software engineer whose efficiency app we ignored while spending $50,000 on an inferior system. The facilities manager shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Day 3. Learned that our black employees are being systematically overlooked for promotions despite outstanding performance. Day 4. Witnessed an employee rationing her insulin because our new insurance policy made it unaffordable. He looked directly at the HR director. "The same insurance change you assured me would have minimal impact on our workforce." The room was dead silent now. He continued, his voice growing stronger. "Yesterday, I watched one of our best young talents clean out his desk after being passed over for promotion a 3rd time. The reason? He didn't fit our company image. As one of the few black CEOs in this industry, I found that particularly interesting. Several managers wouldn't meet his eyes. But you know what I discovered that was even worse? The incredible wealth of talent, ideas, and dedication we've been squandering. Our employees have solutions to problems we haven't even identified yet. They have innovations we're too arrogant to consider. They have loyalty we don't deserve." He pulled out the young accountant's resignation letter. "This morning, I was supposed to sign this. Instead, he tore it in half. I'm making changes. Big ones." The HR director cleared his throat. Sir, with all due respect, any major policy changes need board approval. The board has already approved them, the CEO cut in. They've seen the numbers. They've seen the turnover rates, the dropping productivity, the rising complaints. More importantly, they've seen my recommendations for fixing it. He pressed a button, and the screen behind him lit up with a comprehensive plan. Effective immediately, we're rolling back the insurance changes. We're implementing flexible work hours. We're creating a direct line for employee innovations and ideas. We're reviewing every promotion decision from the past year. We're upgrading our equipment, starting with the front desk. And we're launching a complete audit of our management practices. One of the younger managers raised her hand tentatively. What about those who don't agree with these changes? The CEO's expression was firm but fair. Then it's time for them to decide if they still belong here. Because from today, this company returns to its original mission, being a place where talent thrives regardless of background, where innovation comes from everywhere, and where we remember that our greatest asset is our people. He looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. I've called another meeting for this afternoon, this time with all employees. I suggest you use the next few hours to think very carefully about which side of this change you want to be on. With that, he picked up his receptionist badge and walked out, leaving behind a roomful of stunned executives and a company on the brink of transformation. 6 months later, the company's lobby looked very different. Gone was the squeaky chair and scratched desk, replaced by modern, comfortable equipment. But the biggest changes weren't in the furniture, they were in the people. The young accountant who had almost left now led a team developing a new employee wellness program. Her diabetes management app, created with help from the IT department, was saving the company money while helping other employees with chronic conditions. The CEO stood in the lobby, watching the morning rush. Employees no longer hurried and looking stressed and afraid. Some arrived early to work on personal projects using the company's new innovation lab. Others came in later after handling family responsibilities thanks to the flexible scheduling policy. Mr. Chen had been promoted to head of facilities innovation after his scheduling app revolutionized their maintenance systems. His son had joined the company's new internship program, bringing fresh ideas to the IT department. "Good morning, sir," called the programmer who used to get criticized for arriving late. Now she worked flexible hours, allowing her to care for her special needs child while leading one of their most successful development teams. The monthly potluck had evolved into a weekly cultural exchange program hosted in their new community space. The spring roll recipe had inspired a company-wide cookbook app showcasing dishes and stories from employees' diverse backgrounds. In the new Ideas Hub, formerly an unused conference room, employees gathered to share and develop innovations. The walls were covered with project plans and sticky notes. The young developer who'd been passed over for promotion now led their mobile app team, his talent finally recognized and rewarded. During lunch, the CEO sat in the bustling cafeteria, remembering his week as Robert the receptionist. The rigid departmental barriers had melted away. Engineers chatted with maintenance staff, sharing ideas. Marketing teams brainstormed with cleaning personnel who knew customer habits better than anyone. The company's numbers told an interesting story. While some managers had left, unable to adapt to the new culture, overall turnover had dropped by 60%. Productivity had soared. Their employee satisfaction scores were the highest in the industry. But the real success stories were in the small moments. Like when a team stayed late to help a colleague finish a project, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Or when the parking garage fees were adjusted based on salary levels, ensuring no one had to choose between getting to work and buying groceries. The afternoon brought a visit from a business magazine reporter, writing a story about their transformation. "What made you decide to make such dramatic changes?" she asked. The CEO smiled, touching the framed receptionist badge hanging on his office wall. "I learned that the view from the top floor isn't always the clearest. Sometimes you need to go back to your foundations to remember what you're building." He showed her around the office, pointing out the changes. The old suggestion box had been replaced by a digital innovation portal where employees could submit ideas directly to leadership. The break room now had comfortable seating and good coffee, small things that said, "We value you." The young black employee who'd almost left was now mentoring new hires, ensuring they felt welcomed and supported from day one. The rigid promotion criteria had been replaced by a transparent system based on actual performance and innovation. As the day wound down, the CEO stood in the lobby once more. Mr. Chen was there, training a new employee on their scheduling system. "You know," Mr. Chen said with a knowing smile, "that week when you were Robert, I had a feeling something was different about you." The CEO laughed. "You knew." Let's just say, some people look at a building from the top down. Others look from the bottom up. The wise ones learn to see both views. That evening, as employees left for the day, there was a different energy in the air. Gone was the rush to escape. Instead, people lingered, chatting about projects and possibilities. The company hadn't just changed its policies, it had rediscovered its soul. Looking out at the city lights, the CEO thought about his journey from the reception desk back to his office. He'd set out to learn about his company, but ended up transforming it instead. Sometimes, he realized, the best view of a problem isn't from above or below, it's from right in the middle, where real people live real lives and dream real dreams. And that, perhaps, was the biggest lesson of all.